Hi everyone, my name is Ava and I'm an American living in the Netherlands. And today I wanted to talk to you about a few expectations versus realities of moving to the Netherlands from the United States. I'm betting some of these will surprise you.
Let's start with one of my favorites, housing.
While I enjoyed living in the city center of Utrecht for 3 years, I still didn't expect the housing situation in the Netherlands to be as difficult as it turned out to be.
So if you're like me and you come to a cute European city to visit, you probably expect that you're going to live in one of those cute little houses. Or at least that's what you fantasize about. Now, I wasn't that naive. I didn't expect to be living on the canals of Amsterdam in the city center, but I did envision myself living in a cute apartment in Amsterdam. That was my expectation. The reality was a little different. So I had moved to Amsterdam in a temporary rental, and then I thought I had 3 months to find a place and that was going to be perfect. But not only in the Netherlands is 3 months too far in advance to look for a place, Amsterdam is a notoriously hot market, so I had trouble even getting responses from people when I was looking for a place. I guess one thing that doesn't get talked about a lot, and I don't actually know why, is the prices, because Amsterdam is expensive. Finding a place to rent is not cheap. And when I moved to the Netherlands from the US, my partner, who is Dutch, was still living in the US, and the two of us kind of needed at least a 1-bedroom in the Netherlands, but I had to pay for it by myself because she was still in the US. Let me just tell you, finding a 1-bedroom apartment with 2 rooms, so a living room and a bedroom, is basically impossible on the salary that you get with most jobs in the Netherlands. Now, I know that expats get additional tax benefits, I had that too, but a 1-bedroom was still pretty freaking expensive. So all of that to say, I didn't expect it to be easy because of course when you move to a new place, I had heard that the Netherlands has a housing shortage, etc, etc. I still didn't expect it to be that hard. Wait, that sounds like a song lyric. So my story took a turn and I actually started looking in Utrecht because my job was also not in Amsterdam. It was in between Amsterdam and Utrecht was actually a little bit closer. So I came here and I thought, great, Utrecht is going to be fantastic. I was seeing places within my price range, not to mention that Utrecht is a really cool city. It's super cute. So I thought, let's do it. It wasn't easy in Utrecht either. While there were places within my budget, I actually found that getting a response was even more difficult in Utrecht. So that was sort of a wake-up call for me because I just thought Amsterdam is Amsterdam and it's going to be expensive and difficult, but Utrecht was also difficult. It's not as expensive as Amsterdam, but it's not really cheap. And because the prices are lower, even more people are going to see these apartments, and there are not even that many apartments that come up on the market, whereas I feel like in Amsterdam there were way more places that kept coming up. In the end, I did get my dream apartment in Utrecht in the city center, but I have to tell you, I got very, very lucky. It was sort of at the very end of my budget, and I was really tired of applying for places that were actually outside of the city center, but because they were a bit cheaper, they had even more applicants, and we just got lucky that we found this one place that was absolutely perfect. In all ways but one. It was a really nice apartment, but this one thing really grossed me out, which is that the toilet didn't even have a sink in it. Like sometimes these powder rooms, so this like separate toilet, have a little tiny sink in it, and this one just didn't. So we had to go into the kitchen each time to wash our hands. Talk about quirks of Dutch apartments.
So one of my expectations when I moved here was that I wouldn't actually have time to enjoy all of the beauty around me because I would be too busy absorbed in work. But thankfully that hasn't been the case. I actually feel like I have a pretty good balance between the time I spend at work and the time that I have for myself. Now I think you've heard of girl math, boy math, and here is some Dutch math. I actually have a contract that allows me to work 38 hours a week, but I work 40 in practice, which means that in addition to the days that I build up anyway for vacation, I also build up an additional 2 hours a week, which means that at the end of the year, I have 41 days of paid time off. So often I'm faced with the luxury question of how would I like to spend my free time? So I do things like make videos like these.
Now, my next expectation before coming to the Netherlands was that the Netherlands is really expensive. Because, I don't know, maybe it's this association with Europe, more prominently Scandinavia, that made me think that the Netherlands was an expensive country. So what I expected was that I would go out to eat and it would be extremely expensive, or that I would go to the grocery store and it would be extremely expensive. But it's really not. And when you move here to the Netherlands and you start your first job, you might actually be shocked by how low the salaries are if you're coming from the US. But if you live here, it's actually pretty easy to see that the cost of living is way lower than what I was used to in the US. Health insurance is a reasonable amount per month. Yes, it's not covered through your employer most of the time, but you can pay for it. It's not that expensive. Things like grocery shopping. Okay, the Netherlands is not Germany. In Germany, the groceries are really very cheap. It almost makes me want to cry when I think about how cheap it is. I was in Berlin in August and I was envious. But in the Netherlands, even when the prices have soared in the past couple of years, it's still less expensive compared to the US. When I was in the US, I was completely blown away at how Oatly, what I buy here, is like around between 220 and 250 depending on the grocery store. But the Oatly that I saw in the US was like almost $5, and I was totally, again, blown away. When you go out here, a glass of wine is usually 5 or 6 euros. In the US, it's like 13 bucks, 14 bucks, something like that for like very mediocre wine. I say mediocre, I mean crappy wine. Here in the Netherlands, if you get a €7, sorry, still getting used to that after all these years, it is going to be a fantastic, good glass of wine. So of course there are a couple of exceptions because going out to eat for dinner in the Netherlands is quite expensive compared to the US. Well, it depends on where you go, but a casual meal in the US is going to be cheaper than in the Netherlands in general from my experience. But bearing those few things aside, I feel like life here in the Netherlands is just so much cheaper. Oh, a big difference I noticed, for instance, was when I went to the CVS in the US, doesn't matter what I bought, I always felt like I was spending like $40 or $60. Whereas here, the drugstore in the Netherlands, the Ethos, even though you can go to the Kruidvat, which is cheaper, like I go to the Ethos and it's still, I find to be really cheap. Like I buy shampoo for €1 and it's this like big bottle. Stuff like that, you know? And the next thing I wanted to talk about was Dutch weather. This list would not be complete without a comment on Dutch weather. Now, before I moved to the Netherlands, living in America, maybe again is this association with Scandinavia that I have for the Netherlands, and I think most Americans have that for the Netherlands as well. I don't know why, don't ask. It's not just our bad sense in geography, okay? We think of like tall, light-skinned, blonde people, and we think Scandinavia, so that's probably it. So, you know, association, the Netherlands with Scandinavia, and then when you think about the weather, I think you also assume that the Netherlands is really cold. Like you're always like, oh, it's probably like snowing all the time in the Netherlands. In the US, one time when they talked about Dutch people being so good at ice skating, they said that the canals froze over all the time in the winter and people just, oh my God, sorry, it's so funny. That people just like ice skate on the canals all the time to their work, etc., and that's why they're so good at it. So it should not come as a surprise that I also had this association. And then I came here and I realized that the Netherlands isn't that cold in the winter. It kind of like the coldest it gets is about 0 degrees Celsius, which is about 36 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's really cold. Sometimes once every 3 years or so, the canals will freeze over, but that's going to last a weekend. Rather, the Netherlands is just wet. And it's not wet throughout the year, which is also something that I've discovered in living here, at least in the last couple of years. That's been my experience, that the wet part usually happens between like the fall and spring season. And it's really very wet. Not super cold, but very, very wet. Now let us talk about Dutch cheese for a second. I want to tell you about my expectations or my assumptions about Dutch cheese before I moved to the Netherlands. So abroad, Gouda or Gouda is pretty well known, and in the US, I kind of assumed that it was fancy because in the US, it's a relatively fancy cheese. It's from the Netherlands. Ooh, Scandinavia. I know the Netherlands is not in Scandinavia, but I'm just saying. In the Netherlands, first of all, Gouda is not that fancy. It's just like, you know, a regular cheese. You might use it to put on pancakes. If this sounds strange to you, you have not been to the Netherlands, you have to try pancakes with cheese on them and stroop syrup. It is so good. But that's kind of what I expected, and that wasn't the case. So that was my first little, oh, really? I didn't expect that. The second thing I kind of expected about Dutch cheese was that there would be a large variety of it. And let me tell you, there is not. There is no large variety of Dutch cheese. There is young Dutch cheese, aged Dutch cheese, and old Dutch cheese. And they're all hard and they all look the same and they can come from a variety of places, but that's kind of it. Go to the supermarket and that's what you see. And you can get them in a wedge and you can get them sliced. You can get them in a circle. All the options. Ooh, I'm so overwhelmed. And finally, before I moved to the Netherlands, I expected that in the evenings I would have time to, you know, walk around the city, or maybe after work I would ask my colleagues if they wanted to get a drink, and that's how I would get to know them, make friends that way, because that was my life in the US. So those aspects I kind of expected to some degree stay the same with different people and different culture. The different culture aspect is what I underestimated because now that I live here, my social calendar has never been so full. I could not have expected that. It's just like if I want to plan something, I have to do it weeks in advance. And because of that, I find that I can't really do too many spontaneous things because sometimes my weeks are just full. Like, I have had weeks recently where I have had no evening free to myself. It's just that I've had evenings where I have my hobbies or seeing friends and they're all just planned out. So if I want to do something spontaneously, I just can't because I have a prior commitment. And also, nobody ever asks you to do something spontaneously because that's borderline rude because, you're supposed to plan in advance to make sure that this person's free. If you're asking them to do something spontaneously, that means you're not serious about hanging out with them because otherwise you would have made sure that they were free to do so that they could check their calendar. So this is completely different from what I expected before I moved here. Now, I still try to do spontaneous things, but I have to tell you that the longer I live here, the more difficult that gets because the longer I live here, the more plans I have because my social life is more full. And that's a good thing, but on the other hand, I do find that a bit surprising. And I'm also very tired from all the fun things that I'm doing. Never thought I would have this problem, but it is a good problem to have. So those were just a few of my expectations versus realities of moving to the Netherlands from the United States. As usual, I'm curious to hear what you think. Thank you for watching, and until next time.